Hey team, Yasin here, and in this training we are going to be talking about the coaching skill of reframing. So this is going to be a jam-packed training. I am super pumped to get into it with you. Now, just a recap, what we are doing inside of this training is we are continuing our theme of the art of transformation and learning the skills to be an amazing coach who can influence and guide others through their transformation as well as guiding yourself through self-coaching. And so inside of this training, we are going to be talking about the coaching skill of reframing, exactly what that is in depth, so that way you have a complete mastery of it. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Of course, as always, we do have the training outline available inside of the guide, so that way it is available for you for quick reference. And then let's go ahead and hop right into it. A quick overview. What is a reframe? Okay, so a reframe is a powerful coaching tool and a psychological technique that helps yourself or your student see their current situation from a different perspective, thereby helping open you or your student up to things like new perspectives, new possibilities, new ways to solve problems, new ways to make decisions, new learnings that are more empowering and that actually serve you to get to where you want to go and less disempowering. And so things that you can actually reframe are things like a problem as an opportunity, a weakness as a strength, an impossibility as a distant possibility. You can reframe an oppression, something that was against me, to something that is either neutral or maybe even sometimes a positive. You can even reframe unkindness as a lack of understanding, or really at the end of the day, any other event, situation, circumstance, word, idea, or concept, or new ways of thinking. Okay, so some of the basic examples of reframes. So the frame, for example, might be, hey, I'm not enough. The reframe on that would be, hey, what if you acted as if you were? The frame might be, hey, I failed. The reframe might be, is it possible that the learnings from this would lead to your greatest success? The frame might be, hey, I'm behind. And the reframe would be, what if you gave yourself more credit for what it is that you've already done? And so that, ladies and gentlemen, is the very quick overview of what a reframe is. Boom. Just like that, done deal, quick overview, done. Now, you're looking at the timestamp and you're wondering, wait a second, training's not done, right? And so this is where most people's understanding of frames and reframes stop. Because even as you were listening to me go through that quick overview, you're like, okay, cool, I get it, understandable. You know, I've probably heard this already before. That's it. That's because most people understand this at a basic level. However, those students who wear the failure uniform and complain about long trainings because they don't want to sit down and put in the work and actually learn will say, you know what? That quick overview, Coach Yasin, that's enough. That's enough for me to be able to actually go out and transform somebody's entire life using reframes. But here's the thing. We at Remote Wellness Academy, we know that our students are winners. And because of that, we leave nothing off the table for you to be able to have the most in-depth understanding of these topics. And so the reason why I'm saying this is because I do want to go ahead and provide a training warning at this time, is that this training is going to be slightly longer than what it is that we are used to here in module number 4. Because most of the trainings here in module number 4 were very punchy, less conceptual. And this is because most students already have a background understanding of these concepts and they're pretty straightforward to understand, right? But here's the thing. The topic of reframing is unlike any of the other topics that we have spoken about so far inside of this module. For most people, they actually only have a vague, abstract, surface level understanding of what reframing actually is. But the truth is that reframing is one of the most important skills to have as a coach, as a parent, as a friend, as a spouse, as anybody that is trying to help somebody else. Reframing is the number one skill and tool in the toolbox. Reframing is one of the most important skills to have as a human being, period. In fact, reframing is at the core of what it is that we do as remote wellness practitioners and coaches. Why? Because the reason why most people are stuck, the reason why so many people have difficulty going from the knowledge that they know they should be doing and then taking action on that is because of their ways of thinking. I'm sure you've heard about this before, is that at the end of the day, if you have a different perspective on life, you're able to transform your life. And so reframing is the number one skill because it is what allows people to actually make this transformation, okay? And how do you actually help people make that new way of thinking? I've already spoiled it. It's reframing. And so that is why this training that you are about to go through right now sits at the core of all of the coaching skills inside of this module. This training is honestly one of the most important, if not the most important trainings inside of this entire program, period. Not just this module. I promise you, if you actually internalize the training that we are about to go through, your life will be forever changed. This is how important what it is that we are going to talk about inside of this training is. And so because of how important this concept is, rather than do a half-baked surface level understanding, what we have done is we have made the decision. This is a conscious, deliberate decision by design to go ahead and go in depth on this topic of reframing and frames inside of this training. We could have done, hey, let's make it punchy, let's keep going, let's not make it conceptual, but we wanted to make sure that we were not leaving anything on the table that was going to equip you with the best tools that you needed in order to provide your self-transformation as well as transform the lives of others. And so this training is going to be the one-stop shop on everything you need to know about frames and reframing, period. And so as a result of that, it is going to be similar to trainings that were like in module 2 and module 3. Again, this is by design and this is deliberate. And so because we are making the conscious decision to go ahead and include everything about framing and reframing in this one training, it is going to be longer. We're not going to split this up into like 10 different trainings. We're just going to put it all in this training. So that way it is something that is referenceable by you in the future. And so feel free to go through this training at 1.5x or 2x speed and then slow down when things get too complex for you or if you're not understanding. But the biggest thing is just don't skip ahead. Okay? Cool. And so just like we used to do back in the day, for the sake of nostalgic purposes, Pinky promised me that you'll stick with me and not get overwhelmed. Okay? Promise me? Deal? Awesome. Beautiful. Now let's go ahead and talk about how this training is organized so that way we can make sure that we don't end up with our brains being like scrambled eggs by the end of this training because we went left and right. So talking about how the training is organized is very important. So this training is going to be split up into 2 parts, okay? The first part is going to be all about understanding frames, and we're going to talk about how frames, what frames are, how our brains create frames, how frames are created, all of that, right? So we're going to talk about that at 3 levels: easy level, medium level, and advanced level. That is going to be part 1. And then part 2 of this training is going to be all about understanding reframes and how to use them. So what is a reframe, an example bank of reframes, as well as how to create reframes. And so that is how the training is going to be organized. So let's go ahead and get to work. Part number 1, understanding frame. Let's go ahead and talk about the easy level and go ahead and talk about what is a frame in the first place. So the original word behind reframing is the word frame. And so if we're going to understand how to use the skill of reframing as a coach, we need to first understand what a frame is. Now, just a pre-warning on here. This is not something that you will ever have to explain to your students. This is only for you and for your under the hood, behind the scenes understanding, so that way you can have a better understanding of the concept when you are actually practically applying this to your students, okay? So this is not something you'll ever have to explain, so don't worry about that. Just sit back and enjoy. So what is a frame? Well, the concept of a frame is honestly one of the most important things that you'll ever learn in your life. But the problem with it is that it's a very abstract concept. It's very vague, right? Like if you try to define what is a frame, right? When you talk about framing and frame of mind and these kinds of things, what is a frame? It's not easy for most people to understand. And it has really taken us a lot of years to be able to work with students in explaining these concepts in order to find the best and most simple explanations, okay? So to understand what a frame is, we're going to go ahead and look at this concept from 2 angles. The first angle is going to be what we call the mind shield angle. And then the second angle is going to be what we call the window angle. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through both of those one by one so that way you can better understand exactly what a frame is. So let's go ahead and look at the mind shield angle first, okay? So imagine for a moment that there is a kind of powerful energy field that surrounds all of us that pulsates from the depths of our subconscious, okay? Now, I know that sounds very conceptual and abstract. Stick with me here. here for a second. Visually, this is what it would look like, right? Okay. So it's kind of like we have this energy field that is around us. Now, this energy field, this invisible energy field, is genetically designed to protect our conscious minds from sudden intrusion from ideas and perspectives that are not our own. And so just like a physical shield would protect our physical body from harm, this mind shield protects our mind from harmful intrusion. And so visually, this is what it looks like, okay? So we have this frame, okay, this frame that is around our mind, and what it's doing, the purpose that it is serving, is that it is protecting our conscious mind from intrusion of other ideas that it may not agree with, right? So ideas that it sees as its own, it goes ahead and accepts, but ideas that it does not see as its own, it goes ahead and deflects those perspectives. And so the thing is that we all have this defense mechanism and this invisible shield, okay? Now, this is the first way to understand what a frame is. A frame is sort of a shield that protects our conscious mind from outside thoughts or ideas or perspectives. Okay. Still very abstract, right? Like, honestly, I'm not the biggest fan of this explanation either. So let's keep going and let's look at the second angle to be able to understand what a frame actually is. So we talked about the mind shield. That was too conceptual. Let's go ahead and talk about the window angle, okay? So the second way to understand the concept of a frame is as a window frame that we actually look through. So imagine this guy has like eyes, okay? And he's actually looking through this window frame, and then he is getting information back through the window frame into his eyes or her eyes as well, okay? So imagine looking at the world through this window frame that you are holding inside of your hands, okay? So everything that you see, everything that you hear, everything that you perceive, everything that you feel happens through this frame, okay? So you got this window frame here, and everything related to the outside world is happening through this frame. And so as you move through the world with this frame, the sounds and the images that you encounter are interpreted by your brain in ways that are consistent with how you think, with your intelligence, with your values, with your ethics, with your beliefs. All of that is made to be reconstructed so that way it is in alignment with those things, right? So this frame is acting as like a filter between us and the actual world. This is why we call it your point of view, okay? And so you have a frame, and that is your point of view. That window is your point of view. And so if you look at it again, your frame is really your point of view. Now, here's the crazy thing about this. Because we experience the world around us through this frame, okay? Because we experience the world through our point of view, someone else can look at exactly the same thing through their own frame and see something completely different. And so this is what that would look like visually, okay? So this person on the left, they are looking through their point of view, through their window frame, and they're looking at this thing. And as a result, because they are looking at it through their frame, they see an apple. And then the person on the right is looking at this thing through their point of view, through their frame, and then as a result, they see an orange. And so even though both people are looking at the exact same thing, because of their point of view, because of the frame that they are putting on top of the thing, they are seeing two completely different things. Let's go ahead and look at another example of this in action, right? So here you see that the person on the left is looking at the wealth, they're looking at the money through their point of view, through their frame. Remember, this is the frame by which they are looking through at the world and they are receiving information from the world. Everything goes through this frame. They look at wealth, and because of their point of view, they see, oh, that's bad. And then the person on the right is looking through their point of view, and they look at wealth and they say, oh, that's good. Even though they're both looking at the exact same thing, because they are looking at it through their frame, as a result, they are getting completely different conclusions about what it is that they are actually seeing. And so this is the reason why sometimes your frame is also labeled as your perspective, okay? Sometimes it's labeled as what? As your perspective, because I perceive and I interpret things different than you do because of my perspective, even though we might be looking at the same thing. All of this is because of the point of view, the frame that we are looking through, the frame that we are putting in order to be able to look at the actual object. This is why we sometimes also call this our world view, right? Why is it your view? Because it's a frame, it's the point of view that is specific to you. I hope this is making sense. Again, like I said, this concept of frame is something that I'm sure 99.999% of people on the planet have never even really evaluated, and they've never even thought about what it means to have a frame or a frame of mind or a perspective or a world view or a point of view, right? They've never thought about any of this. And so even though it's very abstract, we're breaking this down to make it as simple as possible with this understanding, okay? Let's go ahead and look at another example here. And in this one, I want to look at a very controversial topic, okay? So let's go ahead and look at the example of, for example, abortion, okay? Regardless of your views on abortion, stick with me here so that way you can understand the example. Because the truth is that regardless of if you think that abortion is right or wrong, there are people somewhere out there in the world that disagree with you, right? Why is that? It's because both sides are looking at the same thing. They're looking at the same topic. They're looking at the same concept. They're looking at the same word through their frame, through their point of view. So as a result, they have different views on the same topic. In other words, they have a different frame on the topic. And so visually, this is what it looks like, right? Both of them are looking at the same thing, right? Which is the topic of abortion. But why do they have different views about it? Is because their point of view, their frame that they are looking at the thing through is the thing that actually paints the lens of what they come up with in their conclusion. And so as a result, this person says, hey, pro-life. This person says pro-choice. Why? All because of their frame. Is this starting to make sense now, right? Do you see now how all of these words are really referring to the exact same abstract topic of frames, right? Do you see now when we say, okay, the word view, we say the word frame, we say frame of reference, we say frame of mind, we say angle, lens, perspective, story, narrative. All of these words really mean the same thing, worldview, right? All of these things, point of view, right? And then all of these are also very closely related to the topics of beliefs, thoughts, identity, version 1.0 self, version 2.0 self, etc., which I'm going to connect for you here in just a little bit, okay? And so I hope this is starting to make sense now as we start to really dissect what a frame actually is. And so have you ever wondered why they call it a frame of mind, right? Example, you say, you know what? Hey, I'm really in a negative frame of mind today. Why is that? It's because of this topic, right? And the funny and crazy thing about this is that we use these words every single day in our everyday language, and yet we don't actually know what they mean. We've never stopped to question what they actually mean. And of course, don't even get me started on this. You guys know my vendetta against, unfortunately, the failed school system and the failed paradigm of society. School and society has never taught us this either. And so as a result, we just unconsciously use words that we don't know the meaning of, okay? And so this is what we are going to be learning about inside of this training and really breaking down how powerful this concept is, how it's really going to allow you to understand how the human brain works and how you can hack it to your own gain as well as the gain of your students and everybody else around you, so that way you can help them transform as well. Beautiful. Now, a couple quick side note. I do want to go ahead and interrupt our regularly scheduled programming to bring an important message. 2 quick mini side notes, okay? Side note number 1 is related to self-coaching. We're going to talk about how all of this relates to self-coaching towards the end of this training. But I do want to just go ahead and point out is that this is something that you can start to apply to yourself immediately. You can go ahead and ask yourself, hey, what are my views on certain topics? What is the lens that I am looking at this topic through? What is my point of view? What is the frame that I am putting on this topic that is causing me to think this way, right? What is the view that I have on things like failure? What is the view that I have on things like routine, right? How do I frame these concepts of failure and routine in my mind, right? Because now you understand, wait a second, somebody could look at the idea, the concept of failure, and they say, hey, you know what? That's bad. And somebody else could look at it with a different frame, the same exact thing. Hey, somebody fails in their life. They look at the exact same thing through a different frame, through a different lens, through a different perspective, and they say, wait a second, that's actually good. Same thing, routine. Somebody looks at it, and they look at it through one specific frame, through one point of view, and they say, you know what, routine, that's bad. I hate routine. It's very difficult to stick to routine, da-da-da-da-da. And one person says, I love routine. What is the difference between those two people? Simply because of the fact that they have different frames and different points of views and different perspectives on the exact same thing. And so this is something that you can immediately start working on yourself with, which is, hey, curious exploration, coaching skill on yourself. What are my views on things like failure, routine, on exercise? What are my beliefs, my thoughts, my point of view on all of these things? Because you can start to become aware that, wait a second, this is not something that is written in stone. This is not something that is a part of my identity, because my identity is fluid and I can change it, just like we learned in module number 2. And so just because I have a certain view, a certain perspective on failure, just because I view routine in a certain way, I realize that all of that is really just because that is the frame upon in which I am looking at it through. And so when I change the frame, guess what? I change what it means to me. And that's exactly what we're going to learn more about throughout the rest of this training as well. So that is the very first quick note that I wanted to go ahead and make here at the tail end of this part. And then the second quick note that I wanted to go ahead and make is the connection to module 2, because maybe this entire concept sounds familiar. Yes, because this entire concept is closely related to our discussion of paradigms and beliefs. Do you remember we talked about paradigm, the world through the lens of belief? And so your frame is literally the frame of glasses that you are wearing. Your frame is literally your paradigm. And so for the sake of not geeking out with you guys and going off on a side topic, I'm just quickly mentioning that yes, everything that we are talking about inside of this training is related to module 2 because they really are the same thing. We're talking about very similar concepts, just from a different angle, right? So we're talking about the window and the frame, and we talked about the paradigm. All very, very similar concepts. And much of the topic of paradigm and frame is then also connected to the topics of belief, character traits, identity statements, and the becoming process. So I did want to just go ahead and mention that. So you're like, wait a second, isn't this the exact same thing? Very similar, but just explaining it through a different lens, through a different frame. Haha, no pun intended there. So that way you can understand it at a different perspective as well. Yep, I know. Okay. Again, I don't want to geek out with you too much on this. Otherwise, this training would end up being a mind melting training. Okay. But I love to geek out on this stuff, but I just wanted to go ahead and mention it very quickly as a side note for those of you who are very interested in this and you want to go ahead and kind of connect everything back to module 2. Hey, you can go ahead and do so. I'm not going to do that much of that inside of this training because I do want to make sure we stay on point, but it is all very related to that. Beautiful. So those were my 2 quick side points. Now we go ahead and get back to our regularly scheduled programming. So where are we right now? Where are we inside of the training? So we went ahead and just right now we're on part 1. Remember, this is all about part 1. And we just went ahead and finished the easy level, which was what is a frame? Okay. What we are now going to do is we are now going to go ahead and take our understanding of frames up a level, and we're going to go over to the medium level understanding of frames and really start to understand why our brains create frames in the first place. Again, just a quick note, this is not something that you will ever really need to explain to your students unless you really want to, but really you don't ever have to. It's really just for your reference and deeper understanding. So don't get overwhelmed, sit back and enjoy, just plant those seeds and really have a fun time having your mind blown throughout all of these topics. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into the medium level understanding of frames, which is why our brains create frames. So to answer this question, I need you to be able to remember what we spoke about in the training that's titled False Belief of Reality inside of Module 2. Because if you remember, inside of that training, we talked about how the brain actually works. And we said that the brain doesn't actually see reality or real world reality directly, right? It's just not how the brain is wired. We said inside of that training, and we proved that with a lot of different examples, that the brain takes in information from 3 places: senses, memory, and imagination. And then it processes all of that information in order to be able to create its own version of reality. And then we went ahead and proved that with a bunch of different examples, a bunch of different optical illusions, so that way you could see, wait a second, even though something is not there, my brain thinks that it is there. Even though something is not that color, my brain thinks that that is that color. Why? Because the brain is not seeing reality for reality. What it's doing is it's taking in the information and then creating snapshots of reality and trying to piece everything together. And so we said that the brain and how the brain works is that it has to block out certain parts of true real world reality in order to be able to keep up with all the processing of information. Remember? Well, guess what? This is exactly what a frame actually is. And so if you actually Google, right, what is a frame in photography, and you look at what a frame is, it says framing is the technique of drawing focus to the subject in the photo by blocking other parts of the image with something in the scene. And so when I said that I was not joking, and we said that we were going to learn to define these terms very specifically so that way you have a very in-depth understanding, this is what we're talking about. You are going to understand, and you are understanding deeper and deeper layers of what this word frame actually means, right? This is why we call it a picture frame, because what's happening is that when you are framing something, you are by definition blocking out other aspects of it, right? So inside of this example, you see this little image on here, right? This person is framing the boat, but does that mean that the building wasn't there? Does that mean that the ocean wasn't there? Doesn't that mean that the pier wasn't there? Of course, those are all there. But by definition, framing something means that you have to block out other aspects of what was in the actual real world reality, because you have to be able to have that frame to be able to focus on something. That's exactly how the brain works. So very similarly to how a camera works, our brains work very similarly, right? And so do cameras capture reality? No, they do not. They construct reality rather than capture it. And if you remember, we talked about this exact same word inside of module number 2. We said that our brains reconstruct reality. They don't actually capture reality for how reality actually is. All it does is it recreates and constructs reality so that way it has points of focus. And so our brains work exactly the same way. Because of the physical limitations of the hardware of the brain, we are unable to take in true reality. And so our brain just takes simplified frames of reality, aka snapshots. And then our brain takes those snapshot frames and puts them together into a narrative of meaning that weaves together into a story that plays into our heads. And so that's exactly what a video is. Check this out, okay? This is very interesting stuff. Stick with me here for a second, okay? A video is a sequence of images called frames. And so what's happening is that our brain is taking these oversimplified frames, these oversimplified images, okay? And then it's weaving all of them together into a cohesive narrative, into a video, into a story that adds meaning to everything that plays inside of our heads, okay? And so that story is made up of multiple frames, snapshots tied together, and that is what makes up our version of reality. So it's very similar to some of those like picture books, you know, those picture flip books that the person has like a different image that is slightly different on every single page, and then they flip through it and it looks like an actual video. It's very similar to how our brains create meaning in the world. It's very similar to how our brains actually create the narrative and the story of what we think is actually happening. And so the world that we experience out there is actually a reconstruction of reality that is built inside of our heads via these mental frames. It's a movie of our life that our brain films, edits, and shows to us in real time. And so everyone's brain is playing a different movie for them, and the main character in every single person's movie is a character named me. And so this is why some people might hear and see some things that others don't. This is why some people might remember things that others don't, is all because they are looking at it through a different frame, and then all of those frames are coming together, and all of them are slightly different frames than everybody else's, and they're coming together to make everyone's individual reality. And so it's not actually reality that we are seeing, remembering, or imagining, but instead our brain's reconstruction of what it thinks it saw, heard, smelled, tasted, felt, or remembered, all imagined through frames, okay? And so frames are just simplified versions of reality. They're simplifications of real world reality. And so if you Google the definition of what framing is, you'll see that this is exactly what it refers to. Frames in thought consist of the mental representations, interpretations, and simplifications of reality. Now, normally, if you had read that on the internet and you said, hey, what is framing? What is reframing? If you had read this definition on the internet, you would have had no idea what in the world it was talking about. But now, because of these trainings and because of your newfound understanding of how the mind actually works, which is everything that I just went ahead and explained to you, you know exactly what it is that this definition and this understanding is referring to. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. You are leveling up in your understanding of frames and how the mind works. And so this is building on top of what it is that we already spoke about in module 2, but I'm just taking it to a different level, a different understanding. It's kind of like peeling back layers of the onion until you really understand the psychology of the mind, so that way you can apply it not only to yourself, but remember, this entire module, module number 4, we are working on applying this to our students, learning the coaching skills that are going to allow us to be able to provide transformation in other people's lives. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Getting deeper and deeper in our understanding of frames. Pretty cool, huh? It's pretty cool stuff, okay? Now, let's go ahead and talk about what is next. We've gone ahead and finished the medium level understanding of frames, okay? So we went ahead and knocked that out right now. We are now going to go ahead and move on to the advanced level of understanding frames, which is the how of frames. So, ladies and gentlemen, strap in, because this is only going to get better and better and better. And of course, just a quick reminder, don't worry, you're not gonna have to explain this to your students or anything like that. Just sit back and enjoy. Strap in. You ready? Are you sure you're ready? Let's jump into it right now. Together, let's go ahead and talk about the advanced level of understanding frames, which is the how of frames. Okay, so this is going to be the highest and most impactful level of understanding what frames actually are. And when you understand the concept of frames at the level of depth that we are about to talk about it right now, you will have complete mastery of the behind the scenes, under the hood of how the human brain works, as well as how to hack it. And so what you are about to experience right now is the study of the rules of life and the rules of the mind and how the mind works at its finest. And I can't wait to go ahead and share this with you. I'm very, very excited. So let's go ahead and talk about that. We're going to break this section up into two parts of advanced level. Number one is going to be how are frames created in our mind? And then number two is going to be how frames change the meaning of our world. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and break this section up into each of those two sections. All right, let's go ahead and do it. So let's go ahead and talk about how are frames created in our mind. So frames are created in the mind using a part of the brain that we actually already learned about. Remember our old friend, the reticular activating system, the RAS? Right? The red car filter that was deep within our brains, deep within the subconscious of our brains? Yep, the RAS. And so do you remember what the job of the RAS was? The job of the RAS was to confirm evidence that we believe in. Remember? Now, does that sound similar to something that we already learned about inside of this lesson? Yup. Remember, one of the angles of understanding what a frame was, remember I told you that this was the explanation that I'm not the biggest fan of. There is a utilization of it. There is a use for it. I'm not the biggest fan of it. However, this is where it comes in handy, is that one of the angles of understanding what a frame was, is that we said that it's the invisible shield that is genetically designed to protect our conscious minds from sudden intrusion from ideas and perspectives and thoughts that are not our own. Does that sound familiar? What part of the brain do you think actually does that, right? It's not just some mojo jojo that's like, oh, this is genetic, this mind shield or whatever, right? Yep, the RAS is what is responsible for that. And so this concept of frames is not some mojo jojo spiritual left field, made up mystical stuff that we just read in a sci-fi novel and decided to teach. There is legitimate neuroscience to back all of what it is that we are talking about up, as well as over a decade of hands-on practice that we have done with our own students, our own clients, and ourselves in order to really solidify all of this understanding and be able to deliver it to you in a way that is practical. Not only that, is that do you also remember our entire conversation about beliefs, right? The entire module 2, we talked about false belief of money, and we talked about beliefs and where they come from and all that kind of stuff, right? Well, guess what? Yep. All of that is related to frames as well. And so we talk about beliefs of money. We talk about what you believe is what you experience. And then what you experience confirms what you believe. And the belief confirmation cycle. Yep. All of that is also related to the concept of frames. Oh, snap. Now we're talking. It's all coming together, baby. And so this is what we are talking about here, okay? So this is the first part that I wanted to talk to you about when we talk about the advanced level of frames, okay? That is the first one, which is how are frames created in our mind. It's a result of the RAS. The second piece that I want to talk about to you here in the advanced level is how frames change the meaning of our world. Now, this is where you are going to want to make sure that you are sitting up. You go ahead and pay attention with me, because this really is the fruit of this entire training right here. This how frames change the meaning of our world. Get ready, because this is it. This is what we're about to talk about right now. Here is the most important thing that you need to understand about frames. The meaning of an event depends on how we frame it. The frame is what gives the meaning to the event. The frame is the story that we tell ourselves about the event. And so this is what the flow looks like visually, okay? And so what happens is that there is an event. Now, event is just a filler word for event, situation, circumstance, word, idea, concept. There's this thing, right? Okay? And then what happens is that based on that event, we go ahead and frame it in our mind because of everything we talked about. The brain needs frames. The brain has to have frames. The brain simplifies reality by using frames. And so that thing that happens in real world reality, right? That situation, that circumstance, that word, idea, that concept, whatever it is, the brain goes ahead and puts the frame on that event, okay? And so the frame is what gives it meaning. Okay, the frame is what is the story that we tell ourselves about that event. Okay, that's the second part of this. There's one. There's two. And then the third part of this is that now that we have the frame, as a result of the frame, as a result of the meaning, as a result of the story, then we now have a response. What is the response? It's going to be a behavior, it's going to be an action, it's going to be a feeling of some sort that comes as a result of the frame that we put on the event. And then as a result of the response, we then get heretofore, which is we get a result, we get an outcome, we get a consequence because of the action that we took. Does that make sense? And so what happens is that when we change the frame, we change the meaning, and when we change the meaning, we change the responses, aka the behaviors, actions, and feelings, which then as a result of that changes our results, aka our outcomes. And so it's a chain, it's a flow that all works together. There's an event that happens, we then frame that in our mind, okay? And then as a result of that frame, as a result of that meaning, as a result of that story, we do some sort of action, and then as a result of those actions, we get some sort of result. I told you you got to strap in, because I was not joking when I said that this is the fruit of this entire training right here, which is how frames change the meaning of our world. And this is really going to go ahead and hit this home for you, okay? Now, the other question that you might have about this is, okay, I understand now, that makes sense. We have this event, and then the frame is what gives it meaning. The frame is what gives the event meaning and the story that we tell ourselves. But the question is, where do these learned meaning of things come from? Remember, learned meaning of things just means frames, okay? Well, guess what? We learn what things mean, right? Okay, hey, failure. What does failure mean? We learn that as a result of either, number one, what people tell us the meaning of it is, okay? And so we learned it when we were kids. People told me, hey, money is bad. Okay, boom, I learned that. That was in my programming, right? Or what happens is that we attach the meaning to the event, situation, circumstance, word, idea, or concept ourselves throughout life. And so maybe it's not something that our parents told us, but maybe it was something that, I learned later on in my life that, money is da-da-da-da. And so as a result, we put the meaning to the event, okay? We put a meaning to the thing. So we have money here, for example. That is the event, the idea, the circumstance, or whatever, okay? And then as a result, we put a frame on that topic. And so let me go here to the visual to go ahead and explain this to you again, okay? So right here, we have a concept, we have an idea, we have a word, failure, money, routine, whatever it might be, right? That is the event, situation, circumstance, idea, or concept, okay? And then we take that and then we frame it in some way, and that frame is what gives it meaning. And we learn that frame either from our family growing up, somebody told us it, right? Society told us what it was, all of this stuff, or we created the frame ourselves based off of certain circumstances in life. Make sense so far? Cool. Well, I want to go ahead and really make sure that you understand this. So let's go ahead and go over an example so that way you can understand how meaning is something that we give to these things and how the frame is what creates that meaning. Okay, so the example that I want to go ahead and give you is a woman in a headscarf, also known as a hijab. Okay, when you see a woman in a headscarf, the question that I have for you is, what meaning do you give it, right? What is the frame? What is the meaning? What is the story that you attach in your brain to that event, situation, circumstance, word, idea, or concept of a woman wearing a headscarf, okay? So the reason why it's an event, situation, circumstance, word, idea, or concept is because you might have this attachment to this meaning when you see somebody on the street wearing a headscarf. So that's basically an event, a situation. Or if somebody discusses with you, hey, what do you think? What is your view on women wearing headscarves, right? And so in that case, it wasn't an event, it was more so a concept, an idea that somebody was talking to you about. And so what's important to understand about this is that what is that meaning and that frame that you are putting on that woman who's wearing a headscarf? Because a woman wearing a headscarf could mean, to some people, a symbol of oppression, and to other people, it could mean a symbol of empowerment. And so this is what it would look like visually, right? There's an event, situation, circumstance, word, idea, or concept, which is the woman in a headscarf, okay? And then our brains, each and every single one of our brains individually, goes ahead and puts a frame on that event, situation, circumstance, word, idea, or concept. And then this is just an example, right? Because the frame gives meaning to the story that we tell ourselves. One example of a frame that is very common that people could put on this event is that, oh, this is a sign of oppression. This is her being controlled. And then another frame that many people have is that, no, this is a sign of empowerment. This is a sign of devotion. She is still in control of what it is that she wants to do, okay? And so again, the frame is what gives it meaning. The frame is the story that you tell yourself. And then as a result of that frame, as a result of the meaning that you have given it, okay, you then have a response, which either, hey, oh man, that's so bad, or oh man, that's so cool, right? What does is the behavior, action, or feeling? And then as a result of that, as a result of the action, you have other results, outcomes, consequences, whatever it might be. And so that is just one visual way to be able to understand this concept. I'm going to go ahead and do you one even better. And I'm going to show you this exact same thing, but with another visual. Okay, so here it is again. Remember, the person on the left is looking at this event, idea, circumstance, concept, whatever it might be, okay? They're looking at it through their frame. They're looking at it through their point of view, right? The frame is what gives it meaning. The frame is a story that they tell themselves. And because they are looking at this woman with a headscarf, as a result of the frame that they have, they see, oh, this is oppression, she's being controlled. Versus the person on the right, they are looking at it through their frame. They're looking at it through their point of view. They're looking at the story that they tell themselves, okay? And they're seeing the same exact thing, but they are seeing empowerment, she's in control, XYZ, etc., right? And so this is the visual explanation of the concept that we are talking about. All of a sudden, when you understand how the brain works and you understand, oh, snap, wait a second, these are frames, and most people are just living with frames and meanings and stories that they've been given or they've ascribed to themselves while they were sleepwalking through life unconsciously in a limbic fashion. You realize, oh, snap, wait a second. Most people have views, have frames of mind, have points of view, have stories that they tell themselves that they don't even know why they have that. They don't even understand that, wait a second, they think that they are seeing reality for reality. They think that they are quote unquote right when they don't realize, wait a second, I'm just seeing my point of view. I'm just seeing my lens. I'm looking at it through my frame. It's possible that somebody else has a different frame. It's possible that somebody else has a different point of view. All because of, we talked about how frames are created in the mind. All of that is really just at the bottom of the day coming from the point of view and the frame that the person has. The event is the same. The circumstance is the same. The concept is the same. It's just how we frame it that makes all the difference. And so, like I said, at the end of the day, the truth is that it all depends on how you define it, okay? What meaning do you give to the headscarf? How do you frame the headscarf? What is your perspective on women that wear headscarves? And so there's an event, and whatever frame you look at the event through changes the meaning of that event. And so at the end of the day, regardless of whatever meaning you put on it, it's just a cloth. Honestly, at the end of the day, if you look at the objective base reality of it, it's just a cloth that some people wear on their bodies. The rest of it is the story that we create to interpret the meaning of it. The rest of it is the frame that we put on that event, on that situation. And so life is all about how we choose to frame events and what meaning we choose to ascribe, attach to those events. And just a quick note on this, when I say event, that's when we are referring to events, situations, circumstances, words, ideas, or concepts. I'm just using the word event here or events here just to make it simple. But when I use the word event, that's what I'm talking about here, okay? And so life is all about how we choose to frame the situations, the circumstances, the words, the ideas, or the concepts, and what meaning we choose to attach to those situations, circumstances, words, ideas, or concepts. And so we get to choose what it is that we ascribe and attach to that external reality. And so this is what I call the thought pattern equation, which is if, when, because, whenever XYZ happens, that means frame, so therefore response. Okay, so if this happens, that means this. When this happens, that means this. Because this happens, that means this. Now, let me show you what this table is about, because it's a really cool table. It's really colorful, but I want to go ahead and show you what this looks like. Okay, so on here we have the event in black. And remember, event is just another word for situation, circumstance, word, idea, or concept, okay? And then on the left side, we have one frame that could be seen with the same event. And then on the right side, we have another frame that could be seen for the exact same event. Now remember, when we say frame, we're talking about the meaning or the story that we are attaching to that event, situation, circumstance, word, idea, or concept, okay? So look at this. We have, if I fail at something. One person's perspective, one person's frame, one person's meaning, one person's story to that event could be, oh, if I fail at something, that means that I am a failure. Versus another perspective is, hey, if I fail at something, that means I have an opportunity to learn. So you see, same event, same situation, same circumstance, word, concept, right? But two completely different frames, two completely different meanings and stories. If my spouse doesn't say, I love you back, one frame could be, hey, that means that something is wrong with me. And then another frame could be, oh, if my spouse doesn't say, I love you back, that means that there's something on their mind and they might actually need my support. You see, completely different frames, completely different conclusions, but all because of the meaning and the story that we attached to that event. Same thing here. If I don't have a lot of friends, that means that people don't want to spend time with me. Or if I don't have a lot of close friends, that means that I need to get better at the skill of making friends, right? Because my parents didn't provide me the care I needed as a child, that means that I am now traumatized, and this is why I don't show care for others. Hey, that's one frame. Here's another frame. That means that it's something that I can work on, because everybody has something that they need to work on. And as a result, that means that I can be a light to other people, so that way they can understand and see that it's possible for me as well. Another frame. There you go. Because I lost a parent at a young age, that means that I will struggle in life without guidance, because I don't have anybody that truly loves me and other people do. Versus another frame, another meaning, another way to look at it, another perspective is, because I lost a parent at a young age, that means I have the opportunity to learn to be more self-sufficient in a way that other people don't ever get a chance in their entire life. And so you can see here, the events are the same. It's just the meaning that we ascribe, that we attach to what those things mean. And so those are just a few examples. Obviously, there are so many other examples that I could run through. These are all just stories that we tell ourselves about certain events, situations, circumstances, words, ideas, or concepts because of the frame or meaning that we created. And so this is what you need to know. These are all learned meanings because we were either taught it from somebody else at some point in our life, or we attached the meaning ourselves. We learned to be able to attach it. In the same way that we learned that XYZ event, XYZ circumstance, word, idea, or concept means XYZ frame, right? You can, in the same way that you learned it, you can unlearn it and you can learn a new meaning to the same event, okay? And so you can learn to tell yourself a different story. In the end, it is us who gives the meaning of what happens because of the frame that we choose. If we simply choose a different frame, aka reframing, then we choose a different meaning to that event, we choose a different story, and as a result, we get different outcomes, aka our responses. Does that make sense? Oof, I told you this was going to be advanced. I told you this is going to be the fruit of this training. This is really going to go ahead and start hitting this home for you. Are you now starting to understand how all of this comes together? Are you starting to now understand the advanced understanding of frames, right? Yes, Coach Yasin, my eyes have been opened. I hope so, because this is life-changing insight. This is so extremely powerful. I cannot tell you how many decades it has taken us to be able to really simplify this information, really be able to condense it in a way that is understandable, so that way it is visually represented, and that way you can have the most amount of transformation in how you see the world, how you see yourself, how you see other people. It's all about frames. It's all about perspective. Now, after hearing all of that, the question that you might ask is, hey, do I have to know all of this for my transformation program for my students? Coach Yasin, my brain is blown. What in the world? I feel like I'm floating in outer space. Do I really have to know all of this practically for my students to be able to deliver my transformation program? The answer to that question is nope. Remember, this is just under the hood, behind the scenes understanding. I want you to be able to know not only what a frame is, but as an RWA student, I want you to be able to know in the back of your head a little bit of why these concepts work, why these concepts are so powerful. And so with this deeper level of understanding, you are now able to become a master of frames and reframes and be able to use them in a way that can transform your life and the lives of others around you. Remember, this training is the one-stop shop to learn everything that you need to know about frames. And so yes, it is a little bit longer, but I promise you it's totally going to be worth it. And so with that being said, what is next? Well, ladies and gentlemen, congratulations, because we've actually gone ahead and finished part 1 of this entire training. So we said part 1 was all going to be about understanding frames in general. So we said, what is a frame? Why our brains actually use frames, and then how of frames as well. We've gone ahead and knocked all of this out, which is part 1. And now we're going to go ahead and get into part 2, which is going to all talk about reframes and how to actually use them. Now, before we actually do that, I do want to go ahead and bring back our old friend. It's been a while since we've seen our old friend, right? It looks like our friend in his office chair, he's out of practice in traveling the entire world, because it doesn't look like he made it very far. It looks like he only made it to his backyard, which is quite a ways away from, the Grand Canyon and the moon and different parts of the world. I guess, he's out of practice. He hasn't done it in a while. He hasn't gone deep on a topic in a while. And so he only made it to his backyard. And so what about you, right? How are you doing, right? No overwhelm, pinky promise. Is our pinky promise still holding up strong? Remember, you can go through this training at 1.5 or 2x speed using the speed controls. You can slow down when needed. Just don't skip ahead. You do not have to do this training all in one sitting. You can break it up. We are just planting seeds for future reference. Don't worry about trying to memorize all the details. And your number one priority, remember, is to just keep going. You can always come back to the trainings and watch them again and use the study guides as well. So this is going to be a part in the training where I would recommend that you do go ahead and take a break, because we did go ahead and talk about a lot of stuff, a lot of conceptual stuff. And so if you do need to take a break, you need to go ahead and kind of just figure out what in the world we just talked about, go ahead and do that. Look away from the computer. Feel free to stand up and move around, because I would highly recommend not doing this training in one sitting, so that way you can actually really understand everything that we are talking about inside of this training. So with that being said, go ahead and take your break now. All right, welcome back from your break. You see our friend in his backyard. He is chilling. He is relaxing. He is taking his break. I hope you did as well. So now we can go ahead and go into part 2 of this training. Like I said, this training is a little bit more dense than we are used to here in module 4. You might not be as used to it as we were back in module 2 and module 3. And so if you do not take a break, it is going to be hard for you to wrap your head around the complexity of this topic, because it can sometimes get pretty abstract. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right back into the training. We said we were going to continue with part 2 of this training, which is all going to be about reframes and how to use them. And so let's go ahead and talk about the first thing, which is, what is a reframe? So now that you understand what a frame is, understanding what a reframe is actually going to be pretty straightforward. A reframe is simply taking something and either repackaging it into a new frame or putting a completely different angle to it. And so reframing is simply redefining, swapping the meaning, choosing to look at things differently, deciding to look differently, creating a new story, shifting our perspective, or breaking down and recreating beliefs about events, situations, circumstances, words, ideas, or concepts. And so when we actually do a reframe, when we do this, we open ourselves and our students up to new perspectives, new possibilities, new ways to solve problems, new ways to make decisions, and new learnings that are more empowering and serve us, and less disempowering that don't actually serve us, right? So if you remember, this is what the flow and the chain looks like, right? We said there's an event, and then your brain goes ahead and puts a frame, because that's how the brain works. It needs frames in order to be able to understand things. And so your brain frames that event. The frame gives it meaning. The frame is the story that you tell yourself. As a result of that frame that your brain creates, there is some sort of action. And then as a result of that action, there is some sort of results, right? Now, we talked about, where do those meanings come from? We said either you learn them as a kid, or you ascribe and attach those meanings yourself because of some situation in your life, right? And so the process of reframing is the process of unlearning and swapping the meaning that we were either given or learned through life unconsciously, and being able to actually choose consciously the meaning that we want to give it. And so what I'm saying here is that most people have gone ahead and sleepwalked through life and have all of these frames and all of these meanings to words, ideas, and concepts, and all of these things, right? They have these frames that for most people, they unconsciously accepted from society, from their parents, maybe from themselves. They all did this unconsciously while they were sleepwalking through life. And so reframing is basically taking those same things that we unconsciously collected in our lives and consciously going in and redefining, reframing, retelling the story, re-giving it the meaning that we consciously want in a way that actually serves us. And so to really hit this home and really hit this understanding of reframing home, I want to go ahead and talk about an example. And I want to go ahead and give you the example of reframe on the word discipline. Okay, so consider the word discipline. For many people, the word discipline has a negative connotation, okay? For many people, they tell themselves, oh, I don't have discipline. I should have more discipline. Discipline is hard. Discipline is about punishing myself, right? But then when you ask them, hey, what's discipline, right? The thing is that they can't even come up with a clear definition. They don't even know exactly what discipline is. They just say, oh, it's a vague, abstract kind of concept. I think this is what it means. Why? Why can't they actually come up with a clear definition? Is because they were actually told by society, by their parents, by whoever was there, that discipline means whatever, right? And so they themselves never were actually sure what it actually meant, because they never consciously framed, they never consciously attached meaning to what the word discipline actually meant. And so for most people, they unconsciously were sleepwalking through life in limbic mode and were just giving meaning to all of these things. They were just putting frames on all of these things. They were attaching all of these meanings to situations, circumstances, words, ideas, or concepts without even realizing it, right? We talked about this in module 2. do. Most people in society are just sleepwalking through life. And so as a result, they have these frames on words that they don't even know what the dang words mean in the first place. And so for this example, I want to take a second and consciously choose the meaning. I want to consciously choose the frame of the word discipline. Let's go ahead and do that together so that way you can understand exactly what it is that we are talking about. So here's my question to you. Where does the word discipline come from? So the word discipline actually comes from the Latin root word, which is discere, okay, which means to learn. And so you know what else comes from this same root word? The word disciple. And so the word discipline and the word disciple actually both mean to be a student. And so when you reframe, when you redefine, when you put a new meaning to the word discipline to actually mean disciple, that means that when you are having discipline as a disciple, you are becoming a disciple of yourself. You are becoming a student of yourself. And so when you are practicing discipline, what's happening is that one part of you is practicing being a teacher to yourself, and the other part of you is being the student. And so having discipline is actually giving yourself the gift of becoming a disciple of your own self. Now, do we punish students or do we educate and guide students? Well, if you're a good teacher, then you actually educate and guide students. You don't punish students. And so as a result, there is no punishment involved in discipline. It has to do more with teaching and learning, right? But society has this other definition of discipline because most of society is in survival mode, and what their definition of discipline is like hitting or like punishing and that kind of stuff. Well, hey, that's the meaning that they give it. But if you look at the actual conscious, deliberate meaning of the word discipline, it has nothing to do with that. And so do you see how this is a totally different meaning, a totally different frame to what most people think of the word discipline? This is what we are talking about here, right? Let me go ahead and give you another example here, right? Related to the same thing, discipline when used with students. So this reframe on discipline has actually come up a couple times in my own career as a remote wellness practitioner and as coach. One time was with a woman named Carrie, and she was a devout Christian. And another time was with a man by the name of Adam, and he was a devout Muslim. And so for both of them, when we talked about discipline, they had these connotations around punishment and difficulty, and I don't know if I can have discipline. It's just not something I do. It's not a person who I am. All of these like identity statements, okay? But then when we reframe the word discipline to mean disciple, to being a teacher to yourself, allowing yourself to be able to learn and not punish yourself, all of a sudden it completely transformed their understanding of the concept. Because for both of them, they were devout believers in faith. And so the concept of a disciple for them was sacred, right? Because disciple of Christ, those kinds of concepts. And so this reframe completely transformed their relationship with the word. And so then as a result of that, we made an action step for them to practice being a disciple of themselves for 90 days. And so this reframe allowed them to be able to stick to the program because it changed the word discipline to be something that they actually wanted. They wanted to become someone who could teach themselves and be a student of themselves, all because of the reframe, all because we reattached consciously a different meaning to the word that they previously had in their mind. How cool is that? Is this starting to make sense now? Are your eyes starting to get open in terms of how powerful this concept actually is, right? And it's literally just as simple as that. It literally is just as simple as consciously redefining and reattaching the meaning to events, circumstances, situations, concepts, words, or ideas, okay? And so to really show you how simple reframing is I want to go ahead and go over an example with you. Because here's the thing that most people don't understand, is that reframing requires change. And guess what? Our brains, our limbic selves, they don't like change, right? We talked about the homeostatic impulse. We talked about hedonic treadmill. We talked about all that kind of stuff, right? We don't like change. We want to stay within our thermostat. And so our brains like to think that reframing is actually harder than it actually is. And so what I want to do is I want to go ahead and give you a visual example of how simple a reframe actually is. Now, remember, a frame is just a snapshot, right? It's an angle of how we are looking at something. And so in the same way, right now, I want to go ahead and give you a physical example of that. Right now, as you are listening to me, you are looking at this training inside of the RWA classroom, and that is what you are focusing on right now, right? You are looking at your computer, and that is where your visual focus, your frame of vision is right now, is looking at your computer and looking at this training, right? Well, guess what? You were so caught up in looking at the computer and at the training, you probably didn't notice that on the left side, there were some pens on your desk. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't, but you can see it on the visual on the actual training, right? So you were focused on the computer, but right outside of your frame of vision was the pens that was sitting on your desk. But at that time, you just weren't noticing it because it wasn't in your frame of vision, right? And then at the same time, when all of a sudden you focused on the pens, what about the pins and the knickknacks that were sitting on your desk, right? What about all the other stuff that was sitting on your desk? Well, guess what? It wasn't in your frame of vision, so you weren't really paying attention to it, right? Because you were paying attention only to the training, only to your computer screen. Well, hey, wait a second. What about the entire tree that was in the background, right? You didn't notice the tree that was in the background. You were noticing the computer, right? You're looking at the classroom, and then you notice, okay, wait a second, let's look at the pens. And then you're looking at the pins and the knickknacks on the table. But then the tree was also always there, but that just wasn't the thing that you were focused on during that time, right? And so it wasn't that those things weren't there. It's just that we had to reframe our perspective. We had to reframe our frame of vision, our focus, in order to be able to see them. And so in the same way that you reframe your frame of vision, it's just as simple and easy to be able to reframe our frame of mind as well. And so this is ultimately what you got to be able to take away from this, is that this is the biggest truth in the world. It's just deciding what to look at. Shifting your perspective, shifting your frame of mind is as simple as shifting your frame of vision. In the same way that you were shifting your eyes from looking at the computer to looking at the pens, to looking at the pins, to looking at the trees, okay? It's just a matter of shifting your frame of vision. And so it's as easy as tilting your head and turning around and looking at things differently. You have the strength to do that every single day in your life because it is as simple as that. You have the ability to choose and decide what to look at. All you have to do is choose and decide to do it. Okay? And so even when everything looks bleak, even when everything looks hopeless, all you have to do is choose to reframe what you are looking at and choose to look at something that is good, because the good is always there. It might not be in your current frame, right? Because all of a sudden you've gone ahead and you framed it in a way. It's not in your current frame of vision, right? But all you got to do is just change what you are looking at. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how easy a reframe is. It's as simple as turning your head and choosing to look at something different, choosing to focus on something else, choosing a new perspective, choosing a different story. But then you might ask, is it really that simple, Coach Yasin? How come the changes that I make don't actually stick? Well, I'm going to talk to you about that later in this training called, hey, reframe my brain overnight, right? I'm going to talk to you about that. But for right now, what I want you to understand is that what we just did right now, what we just talked about right now, is all what coaching is about. That's exactly what coaching is. Coaching is about reframing. And reframing is literally what transformation is all about. It's about providing insight to help someone change their perspective, insight to help someone change their frame. It's all of the tools, the methods, the processes, the systems, the education that someone needs in order to reframe their life so that way they can have a transformation and then actually stick to it. And so as an RWP, all you are doing is reframing what your student already knows and reframing that into something that actually serves them better to get them to where they want to go. And so that way they have a better perspective on life, whether that be the health, wealth, relationships, or their connection to something greater. Because at the end of the day, all of life is just about perspective. All of life is just about the frame that we choose to look at. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the power of frames and the power of reframes. Now, I know this meme is going to be like so overkill, so overused in this training, but yes, I do want to go ahead and use it again and again and again, because now you might be thinking, man, Coach Yasin, I don't know how much of this I can handle. Like, man, I don't know. My mind is blowing up right now. So we're bringing back the Yasin glue. Stick with me here. You're doing great. You're doing absolutely phenomenal. But you can see how powerful this is and how powerful this is going to be for you as well as for your students when you really understand the behind the scenes, the under the hood understanding of this topic. You can then practically use it for yourself and for your students in a way that completely transforms everyone's life. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Now, before we close out this section of the training, I do want to go ahead and talk to you very quickly about two brief notes. I want to talk to you about empowering versus disempowering frames and how every current disempowering frame has a good intention. Okay, so really quickly, I just want to talk to you about this because it's very important. Now that you are understanding what reframing is, how reframing works, and all of that kind of stuff, it's very important to understand this. Not everything in your life needs reframing. The truth is that only the frames, the stories, the meanings that you are telling yourself that are not serving you or empowering you to get to where you want to go, those are the frames that need reframing. The stories, the meanings, the frames that you have attached to events, situations, circumstances, words, ideas, or concepts that are actually obstacles in the way of where you want to go. Because remember, we have our North Stars, right? We have our North Stars that are guiding us to where we want to go, right? We have our current situation, we have our desired situation, we got all these North Stars, okay? And so what you have to understand is that unless you determine that a certain frame is stopping you from getting to where you want to go, don't worry about it. If it's something that's like, okay, hey, I know I have this frame, I know I have this story, I have this meaning, but it's not really an obstacle. It's not really in the way. It's not really stopping me from getting to where I want to go. Then don't worry about it, right? You should only focus on prioritizing and isolating those frames, those stories, those meanings that you have that are disempowering you, that are not serving you, that are actively in the way of you getting to where you want to go, aka your North Star desired reality. Those are the frames, meanings, and stories that you need to reframe because those are going to be the ones that stop you from getting to where you want to go. And so there are no right or wrong frames, right? There are only frames that either serve you and help you get to where you want to go, or do not serve you and prevent you from getting to where you want to go, right? So a frame, a story, or meaning can either be empowering, aka helps you get to where you want to go, disempowering, stops you from getting to where you want to go, or neither, right? It's unrelated. It has no impact of getting to where you want to go. And so remember, at the end of the day, there are no rules in life. Don't get stuck with, oh, I think, I should, I must, I have to think this way, right? This specific way of thinking is the way that it should be. Society and everybody else told me around that I got to do that. Don't get stuck thinking what is the right reframe, because it doesn't exist. The right frame all depends on each individual person and where they are trying to go. The frame is reverse engineered from the actual place the person wants to go. And so one reframe might serve one person and the same exact reframe might not serve the other person because they're trying to get to two different places. Because everyone is working to get somewhere different in their life, aka different North Star, the frames that serve each person are going to be different. And so ultimately, there are only reframes that help you get to where you want to go, which are empowering, and those that do not, which are disempowering, and those that are neither. They have no impact on any of it, okay? Does that make sense? And so that is the first piece that I wanted to go ahead and talk to you about when we talk about empowering versus disempowering frames. That's the first note. The second note that I want to go ahead and talk to you about is every current disempowering frame has a good intention. What does that mean? So it's very typical for students at this point when they learn about reframes and they learn about, okay, you know what? I found a reframe, I found a story, I found a meaning that is disempowering me. This frame, hey, Coach Yasin, I've been thinking about routine in a certain way. Hey, Coach Yasin, I've been thinking about failure in a certain way. Hey, Coach Yasin, I've been thinking about money in a certain way. This thing is bad. This thing is terrible. This thing is garbage. I hate this reframe. I hate myself for having this reframe. Does that mean that they're all bad? No. This is what you have to understand, is that every current disempowering frame that you have right now is actually grounded in a good intention. What does that mean? It means that every frame that you have in your life right now, the reason you have it is because it served some purpose in your life. It protected you at some point in your life. It may not be serving you anymore. It may be disempowering to you now, but at some point in your life, it was empowering for you in some previous version of yourself. That's the reason you have it. This is very important to understand. It's a big mindset shift that you have to understand about disempowering frames, disempowering character traits, disempowering beliefs, because at some point in your life, it was empowering. I went ahead and actually pulled this visual inside of this training just now, just to go ahead and really show this to you, is that at some point in your life, the belief, the thought patterns, the frames, the meanings, the stories that you have right now, that all of a sudden you have identified that, hey, you know what? This frame is holding me back to where I want to go. Well, guess what? It was grounded initially inside of a good intention. It actually served you when you were this previous version of yourself. It's what allowed you to get to where it is that you are right now. now. And just because it's not serving you now does not mean that you all of a sudden have to poo-poo on it and literally just let it like be like, oh dude, it's terrible, I hate myself and I'm broken and all this kind of stuff. This is very important to understand. Why? Because when we start talking about reframes, too many people are too quick to poo-poo on themselves, okay? Too many people, when they start working on self-work or personal development, right? And they come from a place of, man, I'm bad, I'm broken, I'm wrong, I have these reframes and they're all terrible. But remember, we talked about this with the importance of where action comes from, right? What state of being. And so the quality of your actions depends on the quality of where you are coming from. And so you might do the same actions as somebody else, but you're coming at it from a different being, you're coming at it from a different state of being, and then you get a different result. And so if your state of being is negativity, you're pessimistic, you're like, oh, this disempowering belief, I'm broken, I'm terrible. If that's your state of being, then guess what? It's going to affect your doing, and then it's going to affect your having, right? And so your identity affects the actions, affects the outcome. We talked about this. And so that's why it's so important to understand where your actions are coming from, because even though you might be doing the same action as somebody else, the state of being, the state of mind that you are actually coming at it from will impact everything. And so instead of thinking, oh, I have this frame of mind, I have this frame, I have this meaning, I have this story, so as a result of that, I'm bad and I'm broken. Instead, try to understand, hey, every current disempowering frame that I have is actually grounded in a good intention. And so when you understand this, and you understand that your frame is not bad or broken, it's just not the right frame for this new version of yourself and where you are trying to go in this new stage of your life, right? Only then, when you are coming from this empowered state of being, will you allow yourself to have success with this new reframe. But if you're trying to have success with the reframe, but you're coming from a place of negativity, then guess what? It's going to impact your doing and your actions. This is so very important when approaching reframes, so that way you're not coming from a place of negativity, of judgment, of shame, or guilt, because that state of being is very important to be cognizant of. And so those are two quick points that I did want to go ahead and make when we talk about reframes, empowering versus disempowering frames, as well as current disempowering frames have a good intention. Let's go ahead and talk about what is next. Now that we have finished talking about what a reframe is, we're going to go ahead and talk about the reframe examples bank. Okay, that is part number 2 of part number 2. And then just a warning again for you, remember, you do not have to explain this to your students. Don't worry, sit back and enjoy and really just plant those seeds of reference so that way you can understand how this concept works. So let's go ahead and talk about the reframe example bank. So we talked about what reframes are, and we talked about how they open you up to new perspectives. And really, reframes, you can kind of think of them, I think of them like a software. You can kind of like download and install them in your mind. It's like new ways of thinking and new belief systems that you can just like pop in. Like, back in the day, we used to have CDs or floppy disks. You just pop it in, and then all of a sudden you've like installed a new way of thinking, right? So you can literally change the programming of your mind by using reframing. And so when you change your frame, you change your perspective. When you change your perspective, you change your mindset. And so really, perspective is everything in life. And so in this section, which is the reframe example bank, we're going to go over a bank of powerful reframes that we have come across and used with our students. Now, it's important to mention, I am going to go through this very, very fast. I'm not going to go through these in details. Otherwise, this training is going to be like 50 hours long. Okay. But I just want to go ahead and mention that this is going to be a reference for you located inside of the guide. And then the other thing is, don't get caught up on the specific ones that are in here. The wording, the phrasing, it might not resonate with you, and that's okay, because the goal is to be able to find frames that serve you and empower you and allow you to get to where you want to go. And so sometimes copying and pasting somebody else's frame is not as helpful as really kind of exploring and finding a frame that works best for you. And so ultimately, as you continue to deepen your own practice of reframing, that is when you are going to come up with your own reframes that are going to resonate with you and your students the most. And so let's go ahead and get into the reframe example bank. I'm going to go ahead and give you a massive bank and examples of reframes when it comes to health. This is going to be extremely helpful for your students and possibly very helpful for you as well. And then we're going to go ahead and give you a massive bank of examples of life concept reframes as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into the health reframes. Like I said, I am not going to go ahead and read through all of these, otherwise it's going to take forever. But the big thing you want to understand is that in health reframes, what we are doing is we are considering diseases, illnesses, conditions, symptoms, or cravings or behaviors not as enemies, but rather as allies. Okay, so in the same way, do you remember we said that every current disempowering frame has a good intention behind it? In the same way, when we are talking about health reframes, we are looking at disempowering or bad behaviors, symptoms, cravings, illnesses, or disease, right? Well, bad, quote unquote, what people would call them. We call them disempowering because they're not bad, but disempowering things that don't get us to where we want to go. We're looking at these disempowering ones and we're saying, wait a second. These cravings, these illnesses, these diseases that we are saying are disempowering, that are taking us away from where it is that we want to go, we understand that they have a good intention behind them, okay? And so that is the premise, that is the frame through which all of these health reframes are created, if that makes any sense, okay? And so, like I said, I'm not going to read through all of these, but inside of the guide, we have reframes around illness and disease, we have reframes around cravings, we have reframes around weight loss, we have reframes around fatigue, we have reframes around exercise, we have reframes around food, and you're going to recognize some of these from module number 3 because a lot of these are things that I explained to you as well. We said, hey, we're going to reframe exercise as movement, and movement is fun. That's an example of a reframe, right? We're going to reframe food as energy. That's an example of a reframe. And so inside of the guide, I go through in extreme detail some of the other reframes that you can have in your tool belt that you can read through and see if they resonate with you and then really take them from there. So that is the health reframes and the health reframes example bank. Like I said, for the gazillionth time, I'm not reading through them, but I would highly recommend that you do read through them as you open up the guide and go ahead and open them up. The other category of reframes that we're going to talk about is the life concepts reframe. Now, this is personally one of my favorites because it has the biggest impact on our lives, mental health, and our students' transformations as well. And I'm going to go through these again very quickly. And inside of the guide, we have examples of, this is one of my favorite ones. Blank is just a skill. You'll recognize this because it's a reframe that I used in order to be able to frame the conversation when we talked about sleep, when we talked about learning how to be able to lose fat, when we talked about learning how to be able to measure your food, when we talked about learning how to make money. All of that is just a skill. And so the frame of mind, the frame that gives story and meaning to say, okay, you know what? This thing is not that difficult. It's just a skill. And I know that a skill is knowledge times reps. So all I got to do is learn the knowledge, put in the reps, and then I'll have the skill. And so this is one of my favorite reframes that I use regularly. Okay. So inside of the guide, we have reframes around lack of self-confidence. We have reframes around jealousy. We have reframes about caring what other people think. We have reframes around people-pleasing. We have reframes around routine. We have reframes around a lot of work and feeling overwhelmed. We have reframes around things not working out in life, how to be able to reframe those situations. Reframes around negative words, reframes around anxiety, game of life, infinite game reframes, difficult emotions, negative life circumstances, trauma, difficult situations. Oh man, so much. Failure reframes, being in a dark place in life reframes, right? This is a quick one. Sometimes when you're in a dark place, you think you've been buried, but you've actually been planted. Oh, let that sink in. That is a powerful, powerful, powerful reframe. Okay, so I would highly recommend and highly encourage you after this training to go ahead and go into the guide and look at all of the reframes that are a part of this training because they are so powerful, and getting used to looking at them and seeing which ones resonate with you is going to be extremely, extremely beneficial for you. Now, before we close out this section about the reframe examples bank, I do want to go ahead and put special attention to this reframe right here. This last reframe on the life concepts, which is hardships in life. And this one is, what if it was all a gift? And this is a reframe that I learned from one of my earliest mentors, Tony Robbins. And this is a powerful reframe that I'm telling you, if you were to, or when you install this in your life, you will have a completely different experience of life. And this reframe, honestly, is too good. It was too good for me to just quote inside of the training. It's too powerful for me to be able to quote inside of this training. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and play a short clip of Tony Robbins delivering this reframe in a video format. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and play it right now. And so that way you can get the same experience the way that it is delivered, the reframe as it's delivered. Now, just a note, if you are wearing headphones, for some reason, the audio of this video, this is the only version on the entire internet that I was able to find. The audio of this is cut out on the right headphone, so it is only going to be on the left headphone, just FYI. So like I said, this is such a powerful reframe that I had to go ahead and include it inside of this training. So we're going to go ahead and cut over to that short clip right now.
What if we really realize it's all a gift? Even the problems, even the pain, even the car accidents, even the hurts, even the relationships that didn't work out, even the jobs or businesses that had challenges. What if we're even grateful for the fear that struck us because we at least felt fully or the faith that guided us beyond the fear. Keep going. Or the joy that's available any moment you're grateful. What if tears flowed, but they're tears of grace? Just thankful for it all. What if inside your soul knew the truth from this day forward? And if you ever forgot, your soul speaks up and reminds you, life's not happening to you, baby. It's always been happening for you. And it still is, even now.
Oh man, oh man, oh man. Welcome back from that short clip on the reframe of hardships in life. It just hits you in the feels, doesn't it? What if it was all just a gift? It's such a powerful reframe. The first time I heard it years ago, it wasn't in that same video. It was something that I heard from Tony Robbins years ago in a book that he wrote. But it was so powerful. And that's why I really wanted you to be able to experience it as well. So that way you can see, hey, even though we really quickly browsed through and breezed through these examples in the example bank of reframes, each of these reframes that is inside of this guide has just as much, if not more, impact on what it can do for your life, on what it can do for your health when you actually change the perspective on what you are looking at things with. And so that was the hardships in life reframe delivered by the man himself, Mr. Tony Robbins. All right, so let's go ahead and next talk about what's next. So we've gone ahead and now finished what is a reframe. We've gone ahead and talked about the reframe example bank. And now what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and talk about how to actually create your own reframes and what that actually looks like, okay? And so again, warning, you do not have to talk to your students about this. Don't worry, this is for you. So that way you can understand the behind the scenes of this specific concept. So let's go ahead and talk about how to create a reframe. Okay, so creating a reframe can be broken down into 7 steps. Step number 1 is going to be all about noticing and observing. Step number 2 is all about figuring out if it's actually disempowering or it's not actually disempowering. Step number 3 is having full belief and conviction that it is disempowering, it is holding you back. Step number 4 is exploring the origin and taking responsibility of the current frame. Step number 5 is curiously exploring using Devil's Avocado. Step number 6 is writing down the reframe. And then step number 7 is arguing with yourself daily. Now, this is going to be another section where I am not going to go through in depth and detail. This is something that you are going to be pretty much, I'm going to make it an action step for you to go in and actually read through these steps. So that way you can understand exactly how to be able to create a reframe for yourself, because this is going to be something that you are going to be using in the skills session. Inside of these steps is an immense amount of detail that goes into, okay, step number 1, what you have to do is you have to notice and observe. Okay, hey, what are some of the stories that I'm telling myself about XYZ, right? Hey, whenever I hear the word routine, I hear the word scheduled or consistent, I think it's overdone, it's boring, right? You got to notice and observe. Again, I'm going through it very quickly. You're going to have to make it a part of your action step to go back through this guide. Step number 2, you got to figure out, is it really disempowering, right? Is this just something that is holding me back, not really holding me back, or is it something that is actually holding me back, right? And so you say, okay, you know what? I noticed that I have this frame, but upon learning differently, I found out that people who make $10,000 a month actually are consistent and actually are scheduled and actually do have a routine. But I have this visceral reaction to the word routine that I don't actually like. And so what I realize is that this frame that my current character has around the word routine is something that is disempowering to me because of the fact that I know that I am going to have to get over this, because everybody who makes $10,000+ a month in remote wellness is able to have routine and consistency XYZ, right? And so that's why it's very important to figure out, hey, is it really disempowering or is it not really disempowering? Again, I'm going over it very quickly. You are going to, don't worry, it's in the action steps, go through this again and read through it on your own so that way you can understand and ask us questions after that. Step number 3, fully believe and have conviction. Even though logically from step number 2, you might understand, okay, you know what? I logically understand that my visceral reaction that I have around routine, consistency, and things being scheduled, I understand that that is holding me back, but do I fully, firmly believe that within my heart of hearts, right? Because you might logically understand it, but sometimes it takes you to have to learn the painful lesson and say, okay, you know what? I got to look myself in the mirror and say, you know what? My lack of belief that this is actually a problem is the problem. Again, I'm going over it very quickly. You may not understand what I'm saying. It's going to be explained more inside of step number 3 of this guide. And then you can ask us questions if you have any questions, okay? Step number 4, you're going to explore the origin and take responsibility of the current frame that you have. You're going to explore, hey, I have this current frame, this current story, this current meaning that routine is terrible. What might have been the positive intention that served me in my life right now or in the past version of myself? Why might I actually have this frame, this story, this meaning right now in my life? That's step number 4. We're exploring, hey, why have I chosen to have this frame? What purpose did it serve in my life? Where might it have come from? Okay, that's step number 4. And then also taking responsibility. Responsibility is your ability to respond. Hey, I did this to myself. I chose to have this frame because it actually served me. That is step number 4. Step number 5 is we are now going to curiously explore using devil's avocado. Yes, I know it's devil's advocate. I like to say devil's avocado. You're going to ask yourself questions and kind of explore, hey, what is the opposite of this perspective? Hey, what does it look like if I actually had consistency and routine, right? What would it be possible for me if that was actually the case, that it was actually good in my life? What value would having a routine serve in my life? And so inside of the guide, we have a bunch of questions that you can explore to say, hey, how might this new perspective actually be more helpful for me than my current old perspective, okay? After that, step number 6 is going to be writing down the reframe, actually putting it together in a way that is succinct, in a way that actually deeply resonates with you. Again, I'm going to go ahead and mention here, sometimes it takes a little while to find the wording in a way that actually resonates with you. And so here's one, for example, on lack of confidence. The disempowering frame might be, hey, I screw everything up, I am a failure. And then the empowering frame might be, I forgive myself for the things I did when I was trying to survive. Every day I am becoming a better version of myself. Again, remember, the wording you might have to play around with for a while. There's a couple others here. People-pleasing reframe, routine reframe. Again, you're just writing it down in a succinct way so that way you can actually repeat it to yourself multiple times. Okay, so you got to make sure that it hits home. And I've gone ahead and put a couple of points on here so that way you know when it hits home, right? When it actually hits your soul deeply, that's when you know it actually resonates. And then step number 7, you got to argue with yourself daily, right? So number 1, you've noticed the frame that you have. Number 2, you've decided that it's not serving you where you want to go. Number 3, you fully believe with conviction that this current way of thinking is stopping you from getting to where you want to go. Number 4, you've explored the origin of the frame and you've taken responsibility. Number 5, you've curiously explored different ways of thinking using devil's avocado. And then number 6, you've written down the frame multiple times and found the wording that hits home for you. Once you've done these 6 steps, the only thing that is left is for you to start arguing with yourself daily and put in the dang work and be repeating that reframe over and over and over and over and over again until it becomes your default thinking pattern to help you get to where you want to go in life. That's it. And so those are the 7-step process to creating a reframe. Again, I'm not going to read them through again, but those are the 7 steps. Make sure that you actually go through and read the guide after this training. Very, very, very important. Now, a quick note on this. Reframe my brain overnight, right? And so at this point, some students might get impatient and get excited and say things like, hey, Coach Yassine, I created my reframe. I followed all the steps. I've been repeating it to myself every single day for a week now. That means I'm good to go now, right? Like, it's just going to stick, right? But I find myself slipping into my old frame very easily. How do I actually get this frame to become my new default thinking pattern? Well, I hinted at it in step number 7, but I want to go ahead and answer it very quickly. Is that we already talked about this briefly in module 2. Do you remember how the brain works? Because there are physical paths in the brain that are burned in there with ruts in ways of thinking. And so when you have a way of thinking, we think, I'm just going to shift my way of thinking, then snap like a finger, it's done. There's physical changes that have to happen in the brain, in the circuitry of the brain, in the wiring of the brain in order for those changes to stick. And so we talked about how the synapses in the brain get wired in depending on how much you use them. They get burned into the brain, right? The lines and the synapses in the brain. And so if you've been framing something in a certain way for a long time, it means that the brain synapses are attached to that frame, to that meaning, and they're stronger than the new frame, the new reframe that you've created. And so in some cases, that way of thinking, the old frame, has become so ingrained for such a long time, or it's charged or strengthened with emotions or traumatic events and that kind of stuff, that it might actually be very, very strong. And that rut might actually be pretty deep and be a little bit harder, might take a little bit more work in order to actually rewire. Now, does that mean that it's impossible to change? Heck no. But it does mean that you will have to have grace with yourself. It means that you are going to have to understand that this new way of thinking is not going to become your default thinking pattern at the snap of a finger. In fact, it's the opposite. This new way of thinking that you worked so hard to put together on paper, you followed all the 7 steps, you did all of that, it can actually very easily get lost, and you can actually easily revert back to your old way of thinking because the old way of thinking has a stronger pathway in the brain. And so this new reframe, this new story, this new way of thinking is kind of like a small spark on a match, right? And what you got to do is you got to protect it and you got to nurture it and you got to make sure that, you know how when you have a match in the fire, you put it and then you kind of protect it with your hand from the wind, right? You got to, in the same way, nurture that thing. You got to be able to nurture it in a way that it'll actually grow and live on its own. How do you nurture and protect it? By repeating it over and over and over again, enough times over a long enough period of time. You write it down multiple times a day. You repeat it over and over and over again until that small fire, you've nurtured it. It was getting bigger, and then it's big enough to be a fire that stays on its own. And so visually in the brain, this is what it actually is going to look like right over here, is that through repetition, right? In the very beginning, you have this new thought pattern, you have this new frame, you have this new meaning, you have this new story, you use the 7 steps in order to actually create it, okay? And in the beginning, there's no path there. In the beginning, it's basically just like a field that has nothing there, okay? It's like a small spark. But then through repetition, right here, it can become a pathway in the brain through the synapses that are firing, and it gets stronger. And then from there, as it's getting stronger, through repetition, as you do it over and over and over again, eventually it becomes the new rut. It replaces the old rut, the old way of pattern, the old way of thinking, because the old way of thinking, because you didn't use it as often, started to get shallower and shallower and shallower. Eventually, the old way of thinking becomes this, and the new way of thinking becomes this. But you have to protect it in order for it to actually stick. Now, you might ask the question after that, hey, what is the ultimate tool that I have in my toolbox for brain training, brain programming, and brain repetition? Well, guess what? We've already talked about it. You've already learned it. The Becoming Journal and the Becoming Tracker and having your North Stars and having your transformation statements and editing it and looking at it every single day, now it's going to become even more powerful for you. Now you're connecting it to this concept of framing and reframing. Now you understand, right? In that last part where I talked about creating a frame or creating a reframe that actually resonates with you, you might have to write it multiple times. Sometimes what might happen is that inside of your Becoming Journal, you put a frame and you put a wording of a frame, right? Maybe you get it from the example bank that we have in the training. You found a quote somewhere that you really liked and it was a good reframe, right? But the thing is, you put it in your Becoming Journal and it really didn't 100% resonate with you. But then every single day, as you're looking at your Becoming Journal, you're tweaking that sentence, you're tweaking that frame, you're tweaking that reframe until it resonates with you more. It resonates with you more. Day after day after day, you are tweaking it, you're working it, you're massaging it. And then eventually you get this sentence, you get this reframe, you get this understanding, you get this perspective that is just unique to you because it's been reframed to your exact circumstances and your exact situations, and it takes into context everything that you've gone through. And that is the power of doing the Becoming Journal on a regular basis, because it gives you the ability to be able to work on your reframes, not only with repetition, but also massaging them and tweaking them and making them better on a regular basis. And so this is the tool that you can use to reprogram your frames, your stories, and your meanings in life. And what's going to happen is that as you are working on this through repetition and through time, right now you might have a disempowering frame that is not helping you get to where you want to go. And what you do every single day, every single time you go ahead and put in the work, you do the Becoming Journal, you make actions and think according to this way this new identity thinks, you think according to this new empowered frame, what you are doing is you are stacking rocks. And eventually, with enough repetition, with enough time, you're going to have enough rocks on one end of the scale, and it's going to tip. And now all of a sudden that empowering frame has become the default way of thinking, because that disempowering frame with time and with repetition is getting less and less rocks because you're not using it as often anymore. And so does rewiring your brain and having a different default thinking pattern and creating a different default frame, does it take work? Heck yeah, it takes work. It takes a lot of putting in the time. It takes a lot of committing to the process. It takes time of consistently doing this in order to actually reprogram your mind. And so this is what separates the winners in life and compared to those who actually wear the failure uniform. This is where the winners in life put in the dang work to work on themselves. And this is what separates those people, right? Because it's work, the vast majority of people won't do it. You've gone through this training. You've gotten the knowledge. You understand the principles principles behind how all of this works, right? You're going to start identifying what are the frames and the meanings that you've attached in your life that are disempowering. The question is, and the thing that separates you and everybody else, is whether or not you are going to put in the work in order to actually reprogram the frames and the meanings that you have in your mind, because it all takes putting in the dang work. And so the winners in life become relentless to reframe the events, the situations, the circumstances, the words, the ideas, and the concepts in their life that serves them and empowers them to get them to where they want to go. They become relentless on that. I'm not going to go through the entire definition of relentless. I did that in a previous training, but I'm making it clear that the people who are successful become relentless on making sure that they are obliterating all of the frames, the meanings, the stories, all of the things that they have attached to things that don't serve them, and allow them to reframe them in a way that actually gets them to where they want to go. Oh man, oh man, oh man. Whew, I told you this training was going to be a doozy. This one is going to be an action-packed, jam-packed, value-packed training. And I'm super excited that you are learning this, because it is radically going to transform your life and by extension, the lives of everyone else around you as well. Okay, so as we start to close out this training, I want to go ahead and talk to you about self-coaching and reframing, because like we talked about, many of these coaching skills can be used by yourself on yourself, and we call it self-coaching. And so good self-coaches use reframing on themselves in the same way that we just talked about. Good self-coaches understand that, hey, in the same way that I'm going to be helping my students reframe things that are going on in their lives, as a result, I can also apply this to myself and do exactly the same thing that we just talked about, right? And so good self-coaches figure out the events, situations, circumstances, words, ideas, or concepts that they have framed in a way that is not empowering them, and they reframe those things, right? The good self-coaches know that once they figure out the reframe that works with them, what they do is that they know that they must repeat that reframe over and over and over again with multiple repetitions over a long enough period of time to rewire the synapses and the ruts in the brain that will eventually make the new frame their default thinking pattern. And so these are just a few examples of how we can use reframe when coaching ourselves, as well as helping ourselves set ourselves up for success. And so good self-coaches know how to apply these concepts to themselves and how powerful they actually are. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Let's go ahead and bring it all together. Wow, look at how far your understanding of frames and reframes has come, right? We've talked about part one. We've talked about what is a frame, why our brains create frames, the how of frames. We've talked about what is a reframe. We've talked about the example bank, how to create a reframe, self-coaching. We've talked about all of that. And so by understanding the topic of frames and reframes to the level that you do now, you have learned one of the most important skills of how to be an effective human being on the planet, how to be an amazing coach, parent, friend, spouse. You've now learned the number one thing that helps people have transformation in their life. And what is that? It's a shift in perspective. It is reframing. Okay. Now, just as a reminder, do I have to remember all of this? Nope. Right now, you might be feeling like, man, this was all very conceptual. I feel like, man, I just got like hit in the head with a bunch of new in-depth perspectives. It's a lot to take in. Guess what? It's normal. It's okay. And so if you're feeling overwhelmed, this is the perfect time to practice what you just learned. And you can go ahead and reframe. There you go. You can reframe that feeling of overwhelm that you are feeling right now by using the process that we came up with. Or you can pick one of the reframes of overwhelm that we have in the examples bank, and you can go ahead and repeat that to yourself right now. There you go, right? And so over time, you will get better at understanding these concepts. And remember, this was just to plant seeds as a reference, okay? This training was always going to be here for you to be able to come back to. And so this was just a fun adventure that we took in order to plant some seeds and open some doors in our mind, okay? And so if you need to open the guide for this training and review it, feel free to do so. As you continue to deepen your own coaching skills, you'll also deepen your understanding of these skills, so that way you can introduce them and apply them to your students in a better way. All right, coolio. So let's go ahead, and as we close out this training, this is the last point I want to go ahead and talk to you about, is zooming out, okay? I want to go ahead, and as we close out this training, I want you to really take everything that we've learned inside of this training just for a second, okay? I'm going to get really meta with you. I hope I don't lose some of you as I do this. I did want to go ahead and make this a one-stop shop for the frame training, so that's why I had to include this in here. So stick with me here, okay? We've learned all of this, part one and part two. what I want to do for a second is I want to zoom out, take everything that we learned in this training, and I want to zoom out for a second, okay? Because what you got to understand is that everything that we learned in this training about frames is actually only one part of all of this. It is one part that we call the personal individual level, meaning that everything that you learned about frames and reframing and all of that kind of stuff is what you are going to be able to apply to your students. You can apply it to yourself, but it's all on the individual level, okay? So that's what we talked about in everything in this training. But if we zoom out more on this topic of frames, this is very important for me to go ahead and mention so that way you understand this, is that if we zoom out on the topic of frames, right? We have the topic of frames here. And so everything that we talked about is right here. This is the personal individual level, okay? But there's another piece, there's another side to this coin. And the other side of this coin is what is called the interpersonal between individuals level, okay? And so reframing is the personal individual level. And then when you zoom out, there is another piece of this whole topic of frames, which is all about persuasion and influence. And it talks about frame control, frame selection, and how to control the frame. And so all of that is also a piece of this topic of reframes. Now, very briefly, what I am going to do is I am going to go ahead and talk about this other piece of this very, very briefly, okay? Just at the very closing end of this training, I just want to go ahead and talk about this other piece, but I don't want you to get confused. This might go over some of your guys' heads as students. Don't worry about it. We are going to revisit this again, but it is very important for me to quickly mention this so that way you at least understand that there is a whole separate other piece of this concept of frames that exists between individuals as well. And so very quickly, let's go ahead and talk about that right now. We're going to go ahead and talk about persuasion and influence, and specifically, we're going to talk about frame control. So remember, this is almost like a separate category of the topic of frames, okay? So let's go ahead and very quickly, we're going to talk about frame control. And like I said, this entire side note, this is going to be a quick side note. I'm not going to go in depth, but this entire side note could be a training by itself because it's such a big topic, but I can't cover all of it inside of this training. So that's why I'm just quickly mentioning it. Why is it such a big topic? Because this topic of frame control is what makes up the core and the foundation of entire skill stacks, such as the skill stack of influence, persuasion, leadership, management, sales, coaching, all interpersonal relationships, all human interactions, all of them deal with this idea of something called frame control, which I'm going to go over very quickly with you, and persuasion and influence, okay? And so this is not going to be something that I can just go over in 10 minutes, but because frame control does deal with coaching, it is important to understand a little bit of it as a coach when you are dealing with your students and your clients, and that's why I'm going to go over it very quickly. So what is frame control? Stick with me here. We're almost done at the very tail end of this, okay? And then that way you'll understand what it is that we are talking about. Is that just like we learned on the personal individual level, our minds always have a frame on in order to interact with the world, right? We said frame, we interact with the world. Got it, Coach Yassine, keep going. I understand. Awesome. But what happens when two human beings come into contact with each other, okay? Every time two or more human beings, two or more people come together, every social interaction that happens, everyone brings their own frame to the table. And so you can see here, this is the person on the left. They have brought their frame to the table. And then this is the person on the right, and they have brought their own frame to the table, okay? And so because of the way that humans are wired, and because of the way the human brain is wired, regardless of if the two people are friends, they might be trying to be nice to each other, because of the way the human brain can only focus on one thing at a time. It can only live within one frame at a time. What ends up happening is that when two people in any human interaction come into contact with each other, two frames come into contact with each other, what happens is that there is a frame battle that goes on, okay? So what happens is that there is a frame battle that goes on. So this person on the left, they came to the table with their frame because everybody walks around with frames. That's how it works. And this person on the right came to the table with their frame. Everybody, by default, by natural, they come to the table with frames. It's not something you can just turn on or off. It's the way that we are wired. And so when two people come together, even if they are nice to each other, it doesn't matter. Automatically behind the scenes, what is happening is that there is a frame battle that is going on. Why? Because of how the human brain works. We can only focus on one frame at a time. And so when two or more human beings come together, a decision has to be made of which frame is going to be focused on within the human interaction. Because of this, by their very nature, frames in a social encounter are extremely competitive. Remember, frames are a part of the RAS and they're rooted in survival instincts deep in our brain. And so when frames come together in a social interaction, each individual frame is fighting to stay alive and have dominance, okay? And so frames in a social encounter do not merge, they do not blend, and they do not intermingle. They collide and they fight for survival. It's a death match. So what's happening is that these two people, they're coming together and they're bringing their frames to the table, and this is something that's happening in the background, right? Don't understand this as like, oh, when somebody's being mean to somebody or when somebody's trying to dominate somebody. This is just what's happening in the background of every social interaction. Remember, regardless of the two people are friendly or nice, this event is happening as a normal part of all human interaction, period, okay? And what happens to the winner of that frame battle? This is a law of human interaction. I want you to remember it. Here is the rule. When two or more human beings come together in a human interaction, frames by their very nature collide, and the stronger frame always absorbs the weaker frame. If this is going over your head completely, don't freak out. Don't get overwhelmed. We're going to go over this again, but I do want to go ahead and point it out here so that way it is in the back of your head, okay? And so this is what it looks like visually. When two frames come together, remember there's a red frame and the blue frame, right? What happened is that the red frame was the weaker frame and it got absorbed by the bigger frame. And so the stronger frame won. And so this blue frame has now become the primary frame of which these two people are going to communicate within during their interaction. And so as a result, the weaker frame has lost and has been absorbed by the stronger frame. And so this is what is happening below the surface of every meeting, every hangout, every social interaction, every business meeting, every human communication, every human interaction. What is happening for a moment of time during the course of that human interaction is that two frames are colliding, and whatever frame is stronger is going to absorb the other frame, and then both human beings are going to interact with the frame that is the stronger one. Okay, so as a result, every sales call you make, every person-to-person communication that happens, the moment that your frame makes contact with the frame of the person that you are calling on or meeting with, the two frames clash, battle, and grapple for dominance. If your frame wins, then you enjoy something called frame control. And so whoever has the dominant frame in the conversation, in the human interaction, they are going to enjoy something called frame control. What is frame control? Frame control is when whoever owns the frame, aka whoever's frame was more dominant, will have their ideas accepted and followed by others. And if your frame loses, then you are at the mercy of the person who actually owns the frame, right? Because their ideas are going to be the dominant ones in the course of the human interaction, okay? And so the power of frames is the most important thing that you will ever learn in human interaction. There are some amazing books that are written on this topic that cover understanding how to own the frame and win the frame. And we're going to go over all of this stuff in an upcoming module. But the reason why I went ahead and talked about this is because it's very important to understand maintaining and controlling the frame as a coach. In coaching, in leadership, in management, in sales, when they say maintain the frame, this is what they are referring to. Maintaining control of the frame. Holding and maintaining the frame is very important in coaching because you want to make sure that you are holding the dominant frame. Not because you're trying to dominate the person or like abuse them or oppress them or any way, but what we're talking about is really being able to take control of the conversation, right? When you say take control of the conversation, you're talking about controlling the frame. Because if you let the student overtake the frame in the conversation, then they are going to be the ones who dictate how the session will go. But if they dictate how the session is going to go, then there ain't no transformation going on because it's going to be the other way around. They're going to end up just coaching you. And so this is something that we are going to be talking more about on how to maintain the frame in Module 5 when we actually start practicing real life coaching sessions, right? Right now in Module 4, you're just practicing the skills. But then in Module 5, we're going to practice real life coaching sessions between students, and you're going to get practice on how to be able to maintain the frame, okay? Also, when you learn things like the skill of persuasion, the skill of influence, sales, that kind of stuff, you're going to be learning more about that with management, leadership, sales, coaching, all that kind of stuff, okay? There's plenty of different types of frames. This entire topic of frames is quite broad. I'm not going to try to overwhelm you with this. There's different types of frames that you can use. There's hey, I'm going to use the authority frame, the power frame, the time constraining frame. There's a bunch of different frames that you can use and examples of this. I'm not going to go into it right now. Bottom line is that summary of frame control, you can package your power with frames. Everyone uses frames, whether they realize it or not. Every human being on the planet is using frames, period. Every social interaction causes frames to collide, and only one frame survives. Whoever owns the frame owns the conversation. Okay, so that is the quick overview summary of what I wanted to go over with you in regards to frame control. Now, you might be like, what in the world? If none of what I just said made any sense to you, don't worry about it. I did just want to go ahead and mention it, like I said a gazillion times in this section, okay? So we will revisit this. I just wanted to point out that in addition to the personal individual level, that's what we talked about for the vast majority of this training. In addition to the personal individual level of understanding frames and reframes and how to be able to use it to have a better life and transformation, there also exists the interpersonal between individuals level. And that by itself is an art and a skill that you can learn. So that way you can be an amazing person who has amazing persuasion and influence with others as well. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Let's go ahead and start closing out this training. What is next after this, Coach Yasin? Well, Coach Yasin, I get the gist. I know what's going on. Skill equals knowledge times reps. This training provided me the knowledge. I am going to go ahead and have to put this into practice. So we are going to go ahead and go over a very quick training. The next trainings are not going to be very long at all because we went ahead and really hit home this training in a lengthy way. So we're going to talk about transformation question sequences, and then we are going to go ahead and practice both of them in skills session number 4, reframing and question sequences, and putting all of those into practice. So to go ahead and close out this training, I'm going to go ahead and talk to you about your engagement question for this training. Go ahead and let us know, hey, this training was value packed. This training was jam-packed. This training was amazing. What are your thoughts about this training on frames and reframing? What did you like and enjoy about this training, right? What were your biggest takeaways or ahas from this training? Go ahead and let us know. Again, please remember, don't be lazy about this. Really open up the guide if you have to while you're writing the comment. Really go in and give us your proper thoughts on yo, this was something new. This was already something I knew. This is something I was already familiar with. This was something that was mind-blowing to me. I've never heard it talked about in this perspective. Whatever it might be, give us an idea of what your thoughts on this training were. And then let's go ahead and talk about your action steps. You will notice that the action steps are slightly different for this training because number 1, you're going to watch and study this training in full. And then number 2, you are going to go ahead and open up the guide for this training, which is located in the first action step underneath this training. There's a link in there. And then you're going to read through parts of this training. You're going to read through the example reframes. You're going to read through the steps of how to create a reframe. Just really read through it so that way you can start to get a conceptual idea of how all of this works. So that way you're ready to go ahead and implement this in the skill session. And then finally, action step number 3, complete the engagement questions for this training as well, which was the ones that we talked about above. And with that being said, I'm looking forward to seeing your thoughts inside of the student community. This is Coach Yasin checking out. I will catch you inside of the next training.